Bonjour French 101 students, and welcome to video 7 of Chapitre 1. So we are moving right along in our last week of Chapitre 1 before your next exam comes up. So we're going to be covering 3 more topics before we get to Examen 2, exam number 2. So if you remember in the last video, in video 6, and let's backtrack here just a little bit. In video 6, you learned all about le campus et le quartier. So you learned about all these different places that are on a college campus or are in the neighborhood of a college campus. For example, des salles de cours, une librairie, what else, quoi d'autre, des résidences universitaires, un restaurant, une salle de gym. And you notice on all of these slides, we see this expression, il y a. And this is going to be an essential and very useful expression for you in your French studies. So, il y a. Qu'est-ce qu'il y a sur votre campus? Sur le campus, sur mon campus, on my campus, il y a quoi? What is there? Okay. And we also see things that are in the neighborhood of the campus, like des maisons, une boîte de nuit, un cinéma de film, un joli parc, etc. And from there, we're going to move on to talking specifically about this structure or this phrase, il y a, which is the English equivalent or the French equivalent to English, there is or there are. So it translates as either one depending on what follows it. If it's followed by a singular item, it's there is. If it's followed by more than one thing, it's there are. Okay, so you can say il y a un, like il y a un stade, il y a une bibliothèque, il y a des salles de classe. So you see I've used all 3 of these. So these are what we call indefinite articles. In English, the indefinite article is a and an or some. Those would be the equivalents of those 3 words that you see there. So we use those words to kind of point out things that are not that specific. And so we'll see some more examples of this soon. And to say that there isn't or there aren't, we have to add ne and pas, just like we do with other verbs. Like if I say je ne parle pas, I do not speak. So we have the ne right here. I'll put it in a different color. We have pas right here. And it's going around the a, and the a is actually our verb here. It's kind of like saying il y a, like there is there. The e is like there, or it has there, il a, or il y a. And whenever we make it negative, whenever you make a verb negative, you surround the verb with that ne and pas. And after it, instead of using a or une or des, we change it to de. So it's very important to know when you're using this in the negative form that you've got to change that indefinite article a, une, des to de. Okay, we'll have a chance to take a look at more examples of this soon. The other thing they tell us here is that all nouns in French have a gender, masculine or feminine. When you hear gender, the first thing you're thinking of is like biological gender, like girl or boy. But that's not really what gender means in language. Like there's nothing inherently masculine about, let's say, le livre. Livre is book, and it happens to be a masculine noun. Le, the article that comes before it, is what tells you that. And I can go ahead and type these down here so you can see that difference. So, le livre. Or I can have a feminine noun like la table. Okay, so what I want to point out is that even though le, and I can also use un, if I want to say a book, that's what makes it less specific, or la or une table. Okay, like I was saying, people often associate gender with biological gender, but when we're talking about language, it has nothing to do with biology. It's just a way of classifying words, and the terms we happen to use are masculine and feminine. In German, there's masculine, feminine, and neuter. And there are actually 3 different categories that are also called gender. So, le livre happens to be a masculine noun, but there's nothing specifically masculine about a book. It's just, it happens to be classified masculine. It falls into that category, but it has nothing to do with boys or men. The same thing with table. It's la table, it's feminine. There's nothing inherently female about a table. And, even if you have learned Spanish before, you would even notice that some nouns that are, let's say, masculine in French might be feminine in Spanish or vice versa. And so these rules are not even consistent across languages. In English, we don't even have to worry about this. We don't have this distinction, although I do believe it used to be the case in Old English. But la table is a feminine noun, but there's nothing feminine about it, in a biological sense. So all they're reminding us here is that when you learn a noun, learn its gender at the same time. Learn whether it's masculine or feminine, because it's going to be easier to use that noun in different situations and different settings if you already know what the gender of that noun is. So always learn a new noun with the article un or une or le or la to remember its gender. Okay, so let's take a closer look at il y a here. Okay, so as I already mentioned in the previous slide, this word un, which is a or an, or une, a or an, and it depends on the gender of the noun, of course, or de for some, before a noun is called the indefinite article. And the indefinite article, like I had explained earlier, just refers to the words a or an. And it's indefinite because it's not referring to a specific item exactly. If I say a film, un film, I mean one out of many possible films. There are millions of films in the world. I'm just talking about one random one out of all those films. If I said le film, that means the film, and I'm referring to a specific one, like one specific one out of those millions. The same thing with bibliothèque, une bibliothèque. I could say a library in English, and I'm not really referring to a very specific one. It's one out of many possibilities. If I say la bibliothèque, then I'm referring to a specific one. It's the same way in English. Okay, des is just the plural form of both of these. So if I say des films, it means some films. Des bibliothèques is some libraries. Okay, so to make a noun plural, you just add an S to the end of it. Okay, that's pretty clear. We do the same thing in English, right? Although it's generally silent in French unless there's a liaison that connects it to a word that begins with a vowel. Okay, if the word ends in S, X, or Z, then you're gonna use EA, or let's say to make a noun plural, you add an S to the end of it unless it ends in S, X, or Z. Okay, then you don't need to do anything. Nouns that end in EAU, like bureau or office, you add an X to those to make a plural. Okay, so for example, another word that comes to my mind is chapeau for hat. So if I wanted to make that plural, I just need to add an X to the end. Les chapeaux or des chapeaux. Okay, so moving on. All right, so now we can actually take these masculine and feminine indefinite articles and we can add them or create short sentences using the expression il y a. So we needed to know about un, une, and des to be able to know what to do with il y a. So now we can piece it all together. So I can say il y a un stade, so there is a stadium. So sur mon campus, on my campus, there is a stadium. If you want to make it negative, now what's going to happen is this un, indefinite article un, is going to become de. So il y a un stade becomes il n'y a pas de stade. So notice to make that transformation, we have added ne, we have added pas, and we have changed un to de. So those are the three changes you need to make in order to create a negative sentence using il y a. So it's il y a ou il n'y a pas de. So il y a une bibliothèque, there is a library, and that becomes il n'y a pas de bibliothèque. So un became de, une became de. Okay, and we have a command form here, or an imperative. You'll learn about that later in English 102 if you take that class. Now, prenez des notes, take some notes. Okay, and in that case, now we have ne prenez pas de notes. So de in this case also becomes de. Ne prenez pas de notes. Il y a des étudiants dans la classe. Notice the liaison with the S and the E here. Il y a des étudiants dans la classe. Now if I'm making it negative, il n'y a pas d'étudiants. So we'll highlight all the same words in red here so we can see them in all their different forms. And in this case, because étudiant begins with a vowel sound, we're going to change that to de. Il n'y a pas d'étudiants dans la classe. Okay, but there's always an exception to a grammar rule in every language, but not if the verb is a form of être. So c'est un bon restaurant, it's a good restaurant, becomes ce n'est pas un bon restaurant. And here anyway we're using c'est. Okay, so this is a little bit different from what we see up above. Okay, so c'est is with the verb être, and since this is a form of être, we do not need to do the il n'y a pas de. But if we were to do this, il y a un bon restaurant, that would become il n'y a pas de bon restaurant. So you would still need to do that and when you're using il y a. So if you're using c'est, you don't need to change that indefinite article to de, but if you're using il y a, then you do. Okay, so il y a un bon restaurant, il n'y a pas de bon restaurant, and we can change it all back to the original forms we had here. C'est un bon restaurant, ce n'est pas un bon restaurant. Okay, so now you can try this. You can try one expression in the affirmative and another one in the negative, and you can choose any of the places that are on the Lander campus. So for example, you might say, sur mon campus, il y a une bibliothèque. Okay, so that's true. Or sur mon campus, il y a un café, like Starbucks, right? Sur mon campus, il y a des résidences universitaires. There are some university residences or dorms. Okay, there are things we probably don't have on our campus. Sur mon campus, il n'y a pas de stade. Well, maybe a kind of a smaller one, but that might be one possibility. So think about one thing that is on our campus and one thing that is not on our campus. You can type it or you can say it. All right, and finally, we can add some other words, expressions of quantity after il y a. And these just kind of qualify. They tell us how much or to what degree we see these things on our campus. So we could ask a question like, il y a combien de cinémas? Combien, I kind of think of counting somehow when I hear that expression. So combien de means how many, so there are how many movie theaters. Il y a combien de cinémas? I can use an expression like assez de, which would be like enough. So il y a assez de parking. Notice parking is a borrowed word from English. Of course, it just means parking spot. So il y a assez de parking, there is enough parking or there are enough parking spots. And finally, il y a beaucoup d'arbres. Okay, there are a lot of trees. So we can use these three expressions of quantity to talk about how many of these things exist on our college campus. So I could easily say at Lander, sur mon campus, à Lander, il y a beaucoup d'arbres. Oh, there are definitely a lot of trees. And if you drive to campus, you might think that there probably are not enough parking spots. So you might say, il n'y a pas d'assez de parking. So I can go ahead and make that negative so you can see what that would look like. Il n'y a pas d'assez de parking. So there is not enough parking, and there probably never will be enough parking spots. Okay, il y a combien de cinémas? Il y a 5 cinémas autour du campus, around the campus. Okay, so this gives you a lot of different ways you can use the expression il y a. You can use it in the affirmative, you can use it in the negative, and you can use it to say what does or does not exist on your college campus or around your neighborhood. So il y a is an expression you're going to be using all the time going forward. So definitely learn this one. And as we saw in the slides, make sure when you learn a noun, you learn the gender that goes with it, either the definite or the indefinite article. So un livre, le livre, une table, la table. If you kind of memorize that along with the verb, it will definitely make your life a lot easier. And because in French, everything needs to agree. When you use adjectives to describe nouns, you need to know what kind of adjective you have. You've seen that already, even in what we've learned up to now. So the more you learn the gender that goes along with a noun, the easier your French studies will become. Okay, so I will see you in video 8. À la prochaine!